I chose this line of work for two reasons. I like operating in the shadows, and I still believe justice, even the smallest kind, is worth standing up for. My name is Natalie Reyes. At 7:46 in the morning, I tapped my badge at the Everbright Systems entrance. The soft click of the electric lock felt like a quiet reminder, another day, another battlefield. The Austin office was warm with dawn light streaming through the glass walls, reflecting off the polished wood floors, coffee cups, and loose papers, everything waiting to explode at the first spark. The eighth floor was Everbright's fintech kingdom: glass walls, LED panels, servers humming behind the data room door. I walked between cubicles, powered up my workstation, and opened my inbox. 23 new emails, a few license expiration alerts, two vendors threatened breach notices if renewals weren't processed. I took a long sip of dark coffee from my ceramic mug, the kind strong enough to wake the dead, and began checking access logs, comparing metadata, scanning for irregularities. This had been my job for 6 years: invisible, unglamorous, the kind of work that keeps a company from quietly falling apart. When I first joined, CEO Warren rarely appeared on the eighth floor, but his name was everywhere, buried in server configurations, expense limits, and growth opportunities granted to the well connected. I still remember the first time he showed up unannounced during an orientation session. He walked in like a monarch whose empire was made of spreadsheets and investment charts, not fireworks or cathedrals. I sat in the corner that day, watching him the way an ant watches an eagle pass overhead. What I didn't know was that today, a new storm was about to sweep through Everbright, and I'd soon have to face it, my way. A few minutes later, the elevator from the 10th floor chimed. I heard the sharp rhythm of high heels in the hallway before the door burst open. She stepped out, long black hair parted clean down the middle, graphite gray pencil skirt with a faint gold shimmer, eyes full of self-assurance. Chloe Warren, the CEO's daughter. She entered like someone born to lead, to command, to own every inch of glass and light in that office. As she passed by, people glanced up from their screens. Even the plant in the corner seemed to bow slightly. She smiled, not a friendly smile, but one that declared ownership. I'm here. I'm the new order. Get used to it. Before the all-hands meeting, an email from Chloe hit the entire company inbox. Excited to join the team. I'll be reaching out across departments. Let's disrupt compliance. That phrase, disrupt compliance, cut through me like a scalpel. Clever choice of words, trendy and bold. Around me, coworkers exchanged looks, some amused, some wary. A few smirked, a few frowned, and others quietly deleted the message without opening it. I stayed quiet, kept scrolling through the logs. But deep down, a familiar pulse of irritation throbbed, the kind you feel when someone new walks in like they already own the place. In the meeting, she took a seat that no one offered. Mid-discussion, Chloe raised her hand. I have an idea, she said. Heads turned. We should align compliance initiatives with strategy KPIs and pivot vendor partnerships. It sounded polished, impressive, except it made no sense. Pivot vendor partnerships belonged in a startup pitch deck, not a compliance meeting. I stayed silent, eyes fixed on the whiteboard behind her. The phrase, supply chain contingencies, was still half erased. She leaned forward, scribbled the word pivot in the corner, then added, let's circle back offline on bandwidth issues. Bandwidth. That word didn't belong here either. In our world, bandwidth refers to servers, not workloads. She was speaking in buzzwords, not language. That night, my phone lit up with a message from Lorraine. Be careful with the CEO's daughter. Keep evidence. Lorraine had been my anchor at Everbright, the one who knew where every broken file was buried. Her warning made my stomach tighten, but it also sharpened my focus. Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment, tea cooling beside my laptop. A photo of Pip, my little terrier and midnight coding partner, sat by the keyboard. I thought about Chloe, about the storm she carried with her. If she were the wind, then I'd be the tree that bends but never breaks. I thought about all the times I'd been overlooked, left out of meetings, given flawed data so others could fix it and take the credit, told I was too quiet as if silence were a weakness. I knew one thing for sure: I wouldn't be humiliated again. The next morning, I arrived early. The office was still, like the calm before a duel. When I opened my desk drawer, I noticed something odd: a red folder tucked deep behind the files, thick and glossy, as if hidden in haste. My fingers trembled as I touched it, my pulse quickening. I didn't open it. Not yet. I slid it back, carefully, like setting a live bomb in place. Sunlight from the Austin skyline poured through the window. Dust floated in golden air like quiet sparks. I drew a slow breath, then exhaled. Something had shifted. Chloe had stepped onto my stage, and I wasn't about to let her have a solo performance. Wait, where are you listening from? On your way to work? Maybe sipping coffee in Boston or stuck in LA traffic? Just curious, because if you've ever had to bite your tongue while some empty suit it strutted around like royalty, then you know exactly how this feels. The moment you stop enduring, start calculating, and begin to strike back. Chloe didn't back down. In fact, she showed up more and more as if this office were just an extension of her personal dressing room at home. On her second day, I heard the sharp click of heels echoing from the end of the hallway, followed by the mix of expensive perfume and freshly ground coffee. A strange blend, like espresso dusted with glitter. She didn't walk in to introduce herself. She walked in to claim territory. Her gaze swept over the rows of desks, then landed on an empty cubicle near the corner. 3 minutes later, an email went out to the entire company. Effective today, I'll be setting up base near the operations hub to better synergize with compliance. I was compliant, and I knew exactly what synergize meant. It was a polite way of saying she was about to park her chair in the middle of someone else's space and start pulling strings. She didn't need to learn the process. She imposed it. She began sneaking into meetings she wasn't invited to, sitting in the front row like a guest speaker, always ready to interrupt with lines like, "Let's reframe the issue as a strategic misalignment," or "We need to pivot before the audit wave hits." Every sentence sounded rehearsed, like a miniature TED Talk. The problem was, none of it fit reality. Once, during a weekly call with an international vendor, she suddenly cut in. "Why are we still using flat file transfers? APIs are the future." I glanced at the IT lead, who tilted his head and blinked as if asking silently, "Does she know we're talking about security systems, or does she think this is a baking recipe?" I stayed calm. People like Chloe never wait for you to finish your sentence before they argue. They've already rehearsed their rebuttal while you're still typing your email. So instead of responding, I observed. She wasn't trying to impress her coworkers. She was performing for an audience of one: her father, Graham Warren. He might not have been in the room, but his portrait hanging in the 10th floor hallway controlled every look that passed through this place. Every word Chloe spoke, every step she took, was a reminder. The boss's daughter runs this now. One afternoon, while reviewing access logs, I got an email from her. "I've reviewed the audit trail and made a few tweaks for clarity." I opened the attached file. She hadn't clarified anything. She'd deleted 3 suspicious entries, the same 3 I had flagged last week for unauthorized license access, and replaced them with a vague summary: "All entries verified and in compliance," as if compliance were some flexible concept that could bend to convenience. I walked over to her desk, my voice calm but firm. "Chloe, those lines are mandatory. They preserve the audit chain." She looked up with that practiced half smile, half polite, half defiant. "Natalie, I just streamlined the report. We don't want to overwhelm the review team with too much noise, do we?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, the way you look at a frayed wire. You don't touch it, but you know if you don't stop it, it'll burn the whole place down. From that day on, Chloe started reaching deeper. She edited meeting schedules, granted access to accounts that weren't authorized, and even sent emails to clients in Toronto signed Chloe Warren, Strategic Ops Liaison. I didn't recall Everbright having that title. Maybe it existed only on the business cards she printed herself. I thought about talking to Janine, our department head, but Chloe had her calendar locked up with endless brainstorm sessions. The last time I saw Janine, she was walking down the hall, clutching her laptop to her chest, pulling out her earbuds, eyes heavy, like she hadn't slept in 2 nights. I started keeping notes. Every altered file, every strange login, every misplaced click. I didn't want to start a war, but I also wasn't going to be someone's shield for bad decisions. It all came to a head one Friday evening when most of the office had cleared out. Chloe stepped off the private elevator. No blazer, just a loose white shirt and dark jeans, off duty, but still radiating control. She passed my desk without a glance, then stopped a few feet away and turned. Hey, Natalie, quick note. I might need to reference some of your archived reports this weekend. Hope that's okay. I nodded slightly, pretending it didn't matter, but the thought circled in my head. What does she want from my old reports? That night, I stayed late. The office was silent except for the air conditioner and the coffee machine clicking every few minutes. I logged into the system and froze. The username, Chloe W. Admin, appeared in the access log at 10:47 p.m. That account didn't have admin privileges. If she had used her father's authority to bypass security, this wasn't just a company violation. It was criminal. A chill ran down my back. The coffee beside me had gone cold. My reflection stared back from the monitor like a ghost in the dark. I didn't yet know what Chloe was doing, but I knew one thing. This wasn't harmless. And you, if you've made it this far, have you ever felt someone undoing your work behind your back, piece by piece? Someone using power and a last name to erase your worth? If you have, drop a "been there" in the comments. Trust me, you're not alone. This story is only just beginning. I remember that moment as if it happened last night, my laptop screen lighting up in my small apartment at 10:47 in the evening. The name Chloe W. Admin blinking in the corner of the access log, and then a line of metadata pulsing like an SOS flashlight in the dark. My heart raced, but my head stayed cold. No panic, no drama. I clicked Save Log, captured every timestamp, shut the screen, then sat perfectly still as if nothing odd had occurred. Back home, I opened my personal laptop, offline from the company network, and checked the backup I had stored earlier. Comparing the original file to the tweaked version Chloe left behind, I found a mismatch. A timestamp had been forged. The file showed edited at 9:03 in the morning on May 14th, while the log clearly recorded access at 10:47 in the evening that same day from her admin account. No one edits a file twice in one day unless they are trying to erase a trail. The next morning, I arrived at the office while Austin was still wrapped in mist. The place felt eerily quiet. I walked past desks, cold coffee cups perched on edges, untouched login screens, fluorescent lights casting empty strips of light. I pulled up the security feed and rewound footage from 10:40 last night. The camera caught Chloe descending from the 10th floor to the 8th, badge scanned at a restricted door, even though her card had no such privileges in the system. She moved through the hall like she owned the place, confident strides. But her eyes gave her away. That was the look of someone trying to hide a crack in their mask. The camera kept rolling as she reached my desk, opened the drawer, retrieved the red folder she had somehow left earlier, and tucked it into the bag she had brought from upstairs. She lingered for a moment as if listening for a sound, then left. Every frame, every angle, every pixel was proof. I zoomed in, the label "Red File," confidential printed on the corner of the folder, a mocking laugh in ink. Game on. That night, I compared the backup to Chloe's edited file. 3 alterations, 1 timeline erased, and a telltale trace tucked into the metadata, reviewed CW. I saved both versions, encrypted them, and sent the files to Lorraine via double encrypted email with the note, "Lorraine, this is evidence. Reply only when you feel safe." My chest tightened as I hit send. I knew if I were found out, I could become the scapegoat in a game I never signed up for, but if I stayed silent, I would become an accessory. The next morning, Chloe's internal email arrived, Compliance Review Adjustments CW. The subject sounded professional, but between the lines, she was shifting into defense mode. Tweak to improve turned into adjusted due to anomalies, a clever pivot. Coworkers began whispering, "She's messing with compliance reports." I sat quietly, my ceramic mug cool in my hand, but the calm around it armored. At 2 in the afternoon, I met Lorraine in the archive room, under cold ceiling lights that fell on rows of files. She stood in the aisle, holding a printed log. I checked the metadata she pointed to. There were signs of backdating. The file carried a new timestamp that did not match the underlying data. I watched the printed page where verified by CW overlapped the original entry, the older line fading beneath. She added, "I also noticed some prioritized files are gone. Maybe she copied them, then deleted them." I nodded. We stood there among papers like soldiers braced in a calm before a storm. "If she keeps going," I said slowly, "I will force an audit on her team." Lorraine exhaled. "I will help, but don't drag me into a fight unless you are ready." At the end of the day, I went down to the server room, where I rarely set foot. Under blinking LEDs and the steady hum of fans like an animal breathing, I scanned the full access log. Just as I suspected, a new backup had been written under the account CW Override. Metadata confirmed she used a forged admin to overwrite the original file. I photographed the screen, copied the file to an encrypted USB, and stood very still amid the cold machine noises. I knew I was a step from the edge. Sometimes, only when you reach the rim do you realize you can fly. As I left the server room, I saw Chloe in the hallway, badge in hand, moving fast as if searching. I locked the door from inside and slipped out through an emergency exit. She did not see me. I saw her. And the look on her face then was no longer that of someone orchestrating a stage. Back at my desk, I noticed Chloe's laptop was still open, the email I had sent to Lorraine showing sent. She glanced at the screen, then looked toward me. No words, no threats, no smile. Just a gaze measuring how far I might go. In that instant, I knew Chloe understood the game had begun, but she did not know one thing. I do not play chess. I design the board. I walked into the office that morning as if it were just another ordinary Tuesday. Sunlight slid softly across the wooden floor. The air conditioner hummed its familiar rhythm, like the building's steady heartbeat, and a few coworkers laughed quietly near the coffee station. But I knew better. Behind that calm surface was Chloe's gaze, silent, calculating, like a proud cat watching its prey from the shadows. After the accidental incident she staged yesterday, I knew silence was no longer an option. I wouldn't confront her head on. I would observe, collect, and record every breath of deceit. A tiny webcam, tucked neatly between a stack of folders and my notebook, had been quietly watching everything around my cubicle. I created an offline folder, layered with encryption, backed up to an external drive completely detached from Everbright's network, just in case Chloe ever accidentally touched something she shouldn't. On the outside, I was still the diligent employee, smiling when someone joked about their dog chewing up the TV remote, sending the good morning email right on schedule, pouring coffee for the team as if life were perfectly normal. But in truth, I was combing through metadata, tracking logs, and comparing compliance files like an IT investigator, reading hidden confessions between lines of code. Sometimes Chloe's heels echoed down the wooden floor, click, click, each sound like a tap on my nerves. Then one afternoon, when I saw she'd gone out to meet a client, I seized my chance. Badge in hand, I headed straight to the fifth-floor server room. The door opened to cold air, the kind of chill that feels like betrayal. The LED lights flickered green, the fans roared, the machines hummed like a beast holding its breath. I logged into an old system, Compliance Archive old, the vault of forgotten backups. And there it was, a hidden copy of the compliance file removed from the main server but never fully erased. The metadata showed that Chloe had overwritten the original. I took screenshots, extracted logs, and copied the file onto an encrypted USB drive, like salvaging DNA before it could be destroyed. Just as I was about to leave, I saw her through the small glass window. Chloe, badging into the floor faster than I expected. I locked the server room from inside, adjusted the security panel, and slipped out through the maintenance stairwell to avoid leaving a trace. I returned to my desk looking calm, as if I'd only gone to make tea. Later, when I reviewed the hidden camera footage, I saw her clearly. Chloe stepping up to my desk, opening the drawer, glancing around, then placing the red folder back exactly where it had been, as if it had never moved. That recording, I knew, was something no one could alter. That night, when the office was silent except for the soft hiss of the air conditioning and the warm yellow glow falling over the empty cubicles, I worked like someone writing a survival journal. Comparing the server copy to my backup, I found what she had erased: a single unauthorized access entry, access violation, from a user without credentials. The edited version carried her note, reviewed, CW, but the hidden metadata told another story: CW override v2.1. I captured screenshots, backed up the original log, copied everything to an encrypted drive, and sent it to Lorraine, the only person I trusted, with a single note: I have evidence. Both versions. Chloe's signature is in the metadata. The next day, Lorraine called me to the archive room, a dim, dusty place where paper files and fluorescent lights made it look more like a crime scene than a corporate office. She handed me a printed report and pointed at the mismatched timestamps. If this file is reverse audited and they find the invalid access, they'll think you did it, she said quietly. I nodded. I knew the risk, but I couldn't let Chloe's narrative become the truth. We split the evidence, one paper copy, one digital. Plan B had begun. That afternoon, Chloe sent an email to the entire office. I've completed the compliance file adjustments. Audit presentation scheduled for tomorrow morning. Her tone was confident, triumphant, as if the whole stage now belonged to her. But on the hidden camera, her eyes told another story: an edge of panic, a tremor when she glanced down at that red folder. She could already smell the smoke from the match she'd struck herself. That night, I worked late. The attic apartment was quiet except for the soft rain tapping on the roof and the slow turn of the ceiling fan. I sat before my laptop, reviewing every layer of data again, locking the final folder, labeling each USB, printing an extra backup, and handing one copy to the person I trusted most. I whispered under my breath, Chloe, you chose this game, but I'm the one holding the script. Before dawn, I stood by the office window overlooking Austin. The city was still half asleep, cars sparse, traffic lights blinking like Morse code for unfinished dreams. I took a deep breath, turned around, and walked in. The stage she built was ready, but today, I was the one writing the ending. I never thought of myself as someone who sets traps. But that Monday morning, when I saw Chloe's desk empty, no iced coffee from her favorite cafe in sight, I knew. Today was the day. I carried the red folder, not the original, but a carefully marked duplicate, and slipped it into Chloe's bag, just as she had, accidentally, left her office door open for exactly 3 minutes. I didn't sneak. I didn't rush. I moved like I was just refilling my coffee. The only thing I left behind was a sliver of red peeking out from the soft leather of her limited edition Chanel tote. Subtle, careless, just enough to raise a question. When she returned, it happened exactly as I expected. Her eyes swept the room, then darted toward me, as if trying to read what I might have seen. I kept typing, pretending to be completely absorbed in the license report, Q2, like the most important thing in my world was compliance metrics from the Southeast region. Chloe glanced at her bag, adjusted the strap, and pulled out the folder. She flipped through it, not too fast, not too slow, her face still holding that polished calm that said she was in control. Then she slipped it back inside, more carefully this time, though one page still stuck out, just enough to make it look like she planned to keep reading after lunch. The tiny webcam hidden on my shelf caught every second. Clear, sharp, time-stamped to the millisecond. And that was only step one. At lunch, I met Lorraine in the third-floor records room, the only place without company cameras. She handed me Chloe's edited log file. The metadata didn't lie. After-hours changes, unauthorized account, override with non-official admin access. I pointed to the part she'd forgotten to delete, the digital bloodstain she didn't realize still existed. Lorraine nodded slowly. She'll fight back, she said quietly, but she's not as clever as she thinks. I smiled, said nothing. By afternoon, an email from Chloe hit every executive inbox. I've finalized the compliance documentation for tomorrow's audit presentation. The closing line, I'll be leading the session. So confident, so sure of herself, as if she'd just invented the concept of compliance. I read it once and thought, perfect. She'd just cast herself as the lead in her own public trial. That evening, the office was nearly empty. I stayed behind, running one final check. Comparison files, metadata, photos of the folder in her bag, the full video clip. Everything is stored on an external drive hidden in my pen case. Another encrypted copy was sent to Lorraine, and one printed set tucked beneath the bottom drawer, along with a handwritten note, "If I'm not here, open this." Not because I expected movie-style drama, but because I'd seen what people like Chloe do when cornered. The next morning, I dressed differently. No dress, no heels, slacks, a crisp shirt, low boots, the kind of outfit you wear when you know you might have to step on someone's pride. The executive conference room on the 10th floor glowed under white lights. Janine, the company lawyer, 3 department heads, and CEO Warren, who had never once attended a compliance meeting, were all already there. Chloe walked in like she was auditioning for the role of future CEO. She opened her binder, adjusted the mic, and smiled. "We need a compliance system that's agile, updated, and responsive," she began. "I've streamlined the documentation to align with corporate strategy." Streamlined, I thought. But I didn't say it. I just raised my hand and slid 2 folders across the table, side by side. One original, one streamlined. Metadata attached. Access logs included. No words necessary, just a gentle push toward the CEO. The room fell silent. Chloe tried to keep her composure, but her fingers tightened around the binder. "I didn't falsify anything," she said, her voice slightly higher now. "I just simplified the data. Everything is accurate." "Your override account isn't listed in any authorized system," Janine replied flatly. "And the footage from the 8th floor shows you removing files outside your clearance." "That's a misunderstanding," Chloe said quickly, her eyes darting. CEO Warren looked at the company lawyer, who gave a single nod. Then he turned to his daughter, and then to me. "I think we'll suspend this presentation," he said, his tone low and cold, "and begin an internal investigation immediately." I sat still. No words, no nod, no smile. Chloe turned toward me, her expression darkening, like she'd just realized, for the first time, that she no longer controlled the stage. And the funny thing was, I didn't need to say a single word to take the spotlight back. All I did was flip the switch, and she set off her own explosion. I arrived at the office earlier than usual that morning. Austin was still half asleep, veiled in mist, the streetlights glowing a tired yellow, the kind of silence that hangs right before a storm. I scanned my badge, pushed open the glass door, and walked down the cubicle hallway where a few early risers were already powering up their screens. But my eyes didn't stop at my desk. I looked around, feeling like I was walking across a stage where every spotlight had been positioned by my own hand. The internal audit room was already set, a long polished table, projector on, microphones ready, a placard on the door reading "Compliance Review Session." I stepped inside, my breathing steady, scanning the curious looks from Janet, the head of audit, and a few legal staff with cautious eyes. I placed my work bag in front of me, calm but deliberate, the kind of gesture that said I was ready. Chloe was the last to arrive, posture perfect, smile steady, moving like she was about to host a show. She carried a binder, adjusted the mic, and surveyed the room with practiced confidence. I sat across from her, my eyes fixed on the projection screen. A voice in my head whispered, "You entered this kingdom. Today, you'll find out who wrote its laws." Janine opened the meeting, greeting everyone and outlining the goals of the session. When it was Chloe's turn, she stood, soothed her hair, like she was rehearsing a performance, and said, "I've prepared a refined version of the compliance documentation. I've removed redundancies, tightened the structure, and aligned it with our strategic metrics. I look forward to walking leadership through it." Her tone was steady, self-assured. She pulled up her slides. Key compliance revisions. Q2 alignment. I recognized the altered sections instantly. I didn't react. I just watched her point at the slide titled Data Integrity and say, "These changes eliminate noise and keep the focus on what matters." Noise, I thought. The perfect word for silencing questions. When Chloe finished, Janine nodded and turned to me. "Natalie, would you like to present your comparison between the original and revised documents?" This was the moment. I stood, carrying the printed sets I'd prepared, the original, the revision, the metadata extracts, and photos of the red folder in her bag. I placed them neatly on the table. Under the gaze of everyone in the room, I walked to the projector and opened the side-by-side comparison. On the left, the original file from the server archive. On the right, Chloe's refined version. I highlighted the discrepancies, deleted access logs, metadata labeled CW override, mismatched timestamps, unauthorized overrides. Then I opened the folder of photos, projecting the still from the hidden camera. Chloe's eyes flicked across the screen. Her lips pressed tight. A faint whisper slipped from one of the directors. "Wow." The technician opened the live system log on the main screen. The audit trail appeared. Username Chloe W. Admin. Modification timestamp 10:47 p.m. Unauthorized override. No approval record. The soft click of the next slide moving sounded like a blade being drawn. The room went silent enough to hear the faint jingle of keys in someone's pocket. Chloe tried to steady her tone. "That's not correct. I only refined the language. All values remain consistent." I looked straight at her. "Refined language? You deleted an access violation log, removed the backup integrity record, and used an unapproved admin account. You didn't refine anything. You rewrote the truth." My voice was quiet, but each word landed hard in the still air. Janine rose from her seat. "Chloe, legal and audit will proceed with a full verification. For now, I suggest we pause this session and initiate a live server check to validate the original data." CEO Warren lifted his head, his expression a mix of confusion and controlled anger. Chloe's voice cracked slightly. "You're escalating this too fast. I just need time to explain." But the directors were already studying the screen, the comparisons, the logs. Some nodded, some frowned. The company lawyer stepped closer to the display. "If the metadata and audit trail match Natalie's comparison, this is irrefutable technical evidence." Chloe turned to her father, seeking help, but he sat motionless, hands clasped on the table, eyes steady on the screen. The tension in the room stretched thin, sharp as a wire. The technician displayed both files, original and modified, on the main monitor. Metadata, CW override. Access logs are misaligned, timestamps altered. A soft exhale came from one director. She got caught. Chloe's eyes widened. Her jaw slackened. She said nothing. Janine tapped the mic. "Effective immediately, Chloe Warren is suspended pending full investigation." CEO Warren stood, his voice low, controlled. "Chloe, I trust my daughter, but I also trust the data. We'll need to get to the bottom of this." "But Dad, she started. "No buts," he interrupted. "The process stands." I sat back, feeling the tension unwind in my chest. Not triumph, but release. Because I knew this wasn't over. But I also knew I had timed everything exactly right. When the meeting ended, I gathered my papers and stepped out into the hallway. The lights seemed dimmer now, the air heavier. I heard Chloe's footsteps behind me, but didn't turn around. I didn't have to. This time, the spotlight wasn't hers to hold. I stopped by the glass doors, looked out at the faint rain falling over Austin, and said quietly to myself, "Play with fire, you get burned." She struck the match, and today, the light gave her away. It should have ended there. Chloe should have been suspended for a few days. People would whisper for a week, and the story would fade into silence. Just another case of a privileged daughter, escaping consequence under the family name, and a well-paid legal team. But there was one thing Chloe hadn't accounted for, or maybe wasn't smart enough to fear: the new culture of accountability quietly replacing the old culture of excuses. One day after the audit, a plain white van parked by the service entrance near the back stairwell. No one paid attention until the first man in a black suit stepped into the office. No briefcase, no laptop. Just a clipboard and the eyes of someone who'd seen too many lies unravel. Behind him was a woman in a pale blue shirt, hair pulled into a neat bun, frameless glasses catching the hallway light. From the way they moved, silent, direct, without asking for directions, I knew exactly who they were. High-level internal investigators. The kind you only saw when the stench of scandal had gotten too strong to ignore. Slack slowed down across the company, as if even the server felt the tension. The sound of keyboards faded until all that remained was the echo of footsteps and the low hum of the air conditioning. Chloe didn't show up that morning. Rumor had it she'd been told to stay home, but her name was everywhere, in whispers on every floor, in private phone messages, in the quiet avoidance when someone mentioned the compliance folder. I stayed calm. I went to meetings on time, drank coffee with the analytics team like nothing had changed, and even joined a brainstorming session for Q3 planning. But inside, I knew the undercurrent was building by the hour. I didn't have to lift another finger. The traces Chloe left behind were unraveling on their own, like old film rewinding itself. By Wednesday afternoon, I was called into a small room near HR. No appointment, no warning. Just a knock and a voice that said, "Natalie, compliance needs to see you." I followed, carrying one thing, a small silver drive holding every piece of evidence. Timestamps, photos, videos, side-by-side files, all duplicated and stored in 3 separate locations. Not because I feared being framed, because I'd learned that the truth doesn't need to shout, but it does need to be preserved properly. The room was colder than I expected. 3 people sat waiting: the lead investigator, a legal representative, and Janine from compliance. They didn't waste time. They began with a quiet thank you for my cooperation, then moved into questions. No pressure, no interruptions, but sharp enough that anyone unprepared would have tangled themselves in contradiction. I told them everything. From the first anomaly I spotted, to placing the folder in Chloe's bag, to the audit session itself. No embellishment, no omission. Just the truth, step by step, in perfect order. Each time I answered, they nodded slightly, typing notes. When I handed over the drive, they didn't ask questions. They plugged it in, opened the folder labeled Red Case Chronology, and silently clicked through each file. When the footage played, Chloe slipping the folder into my drawer, the investigator raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "You anticipated she'd deny this, didn't you?" I nodded. "That's why you set up the webcam, logged access, and made copies?" I nodded again. For the first time since the session began, he smiled faintly. "That level of caution is almost artful." I didn't smile back. "I don't have the privilege of being wrong," I said. The interview ended after nearly an hour. As I walked out, co-workers watched me pass. No one spoke, but in their eyes I didn't see fear. I saw respect. Back at my desk, I opened my inbox. A new email from the CEO's office waited at the top. A company-wide meeting had been scheduled for the next morning. Topic: reinforcing trust and accountability. I almost laughed, partly at the corporate cliché, partly at the irony that it took a CEO facing his own daughter's internal sabotage to finally talk about trust. That night, I didn't leave right away. I sat by the window, looking down at the city as the lights came on one by one. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. Chloe had already done enough to burn herself down. I'd just chosen the right moment to pull back the curtain. I stayed up all night waiting for the internal bulletin, expecting at least a suspension notice for Chloe, or maybe an apology from the board. Instead, there was silence, a silence heavier than any outcry. The next morning, Everbright's glass facade blazed under the Austin sun. I walked through the lobby, watching my reflection stretch across the floor before stepping over the red carpet at the entrance. It wasn't laid out for me, it was for the CEO. But sometimes when you walk the right path, people notice anyway. The rumor spread fast. Chloe had been called in for cooperation. The phrase everyone in corporate life knows as code for career death. Slack notifications from the compliance team pinged like breaking news. HR to contact Chloe today. Within hours, a new tag appeared online. #Ever Bright Scandal. That afternoon, CEO Graham Warren showed up on the 8th floor. No suit, no tie, just a rolled up shirt and an expression stripped of the usual corporate armor. Every head turned. He didn't make a speech. He just walked the floor, paused outside the compliance office, and let his gaze rest on my desk for a few seconds. It wasn't angry, it was measured. Then he stepped into a side room, and the door closed quietly behind him, like punctuation at the end of an unspoken sentence. The internal bulletin came minutes later. Chloe Warren has been asked to cooperate with an internal investigation. CEO Warren reaffirms commitment to transparency. The words were sterile and precise. I was called into a private meeting with the executive board and the company's legal counsel. No reporters, no audience, just four walls and dim light. They locked the room. When I sat down, Janine gave a small nod. "We need to discuss internal measures and external communication," she said. I listened. They talked about investor confidence, PR fallout, and protecting the company's image. It sounded less like crisis management and more like a press rehearsal for a data breach, clinical, detached. When the conversation turned to Chloe, the CFO said, "We'll suspend her indefinitely pending the investigation. But if the story leaks first, she'll become the face of this scandal." I looked up, smiled faintly. She already is. Containment doesn't erase exposure. The room went quiet. The corporate lawyer finally spoke, suggesting they'd like me to stay on, with a promotion, Director of Risk and Compliance, a title that weighed more like a burden than a reward. I understood what it meant. Step into the system I had just exposed. The meeting ended. I walked out into the hallway and watched the late afternoon light flash off the glass towers outside. Somewhere beyond the closed doors of the restricted floor, I could hear footsteps, hers maybe, echoing in a corridor that no longer belonged to her. Graham Warren would have to face not just his daughter's name, but what that name had shielded for years: power, conflict, and the slow collapse of a dynasty. The story broke publicly that evening. Tech finance headlines screamed, "CEO's daughter arrested inside the Everbright scandal." Partners called, clients called, investors demanded clarity. By noon the next day, the CFO sat in his office like a soldier in a crumbling fortress, while support lines fielded questions. Is Everbright safe? The official answer was yes, but the voices didn't sound convinced. And I knew, when a kingdom built on control begins to fall, it's the ones guarding the system who carry the final weight. The following morning, federal investigators, not the company's own, arrived. Chloe was led out of the building in handcuffs. Two security officers were at her side. Her coat slipped off one shoulder, her expression blank with disbelief. People stopped working. Some took photos. Through the lobby glass, I saw her reflection, pale, fragile, almost unrecognizable. Whispers buzzed through the floor like a hive waking at dawn. I stood at my desk, hands steady, eyes fixed on the moment power finally met consequence. Later that week, I stayed late in the quiet compliance room, soft yellow light spilling across the desk. A new email blinked on screen, from a firm in Seattle. "We value integrity. We believe in people, not politics." I read it twice. Every word felt like oxygen after too many nights of holding my breath. I smiled faintly, but didn't reply. Not yet. I needed to breathe first, to see what kind of future I wanted when the dust settled. When I left Everbright for the last time, I carried only a few things: Pip's framed photo, the little desk plant, and my badge with its chipped corner. The office around me was dim, screens dark, lights fading one by one, an ending written in silence. I walked down the stairs without looking back. The Austin wind brushed past the trees, cool and clean, and somewhere in it, I heard my own voice, steady and sure. "No one gives you power. You bring it with you." The next morning, as the Austin sunlight slipped through the glass walls of the 8th floor, I walked into Everbright, not with a new badge, but with a sense of freedom that felt both small and vast. The door beeped softly as I scanned in, like a quiet reminder that this place no longer belonged to anyone else. I wore a fitted blazer, black slacks, and low-heeled derby shoes, the kind of outfit for someone ready to walk the rest of the road without looking back. I knew this was the day I would close the curtain. The executive boardroom gleamed, all polished wood and steady light. Janine stood near the door, her smile gentle, sincere. The company lawyer, CFO, and a few executives were already seated. I entered, not hurried, not tense, but grounded in the quiet confidence built from every step I'd taken the night before. Chloe, no, I should call her by her real name, wasn't there. She'd been suspended, and the police were now involved. The room felt taut, not chaotic, but like the final round of a match everyone knew was ending. Graham Warren stepped out from the glass office behind us, white shirt, coffee in hand. He didn't open with words, just looked at me. The distance between us felt wider than the word CEO etched on his old nameplate. He nodded once, whispered something to Janine, a silent handover that said, "Let her speak." Janine invited me to the front. I walked up, placed my hand on the mouse, and opened my presentation. Chronology and accountability. The ever-bright compliance case. The slide unfolded into a timeline. Chloe's first day, the edits, the audit, the arrest, the offer from Seattle. Every checkpoint documented, screenshots, logs, metadata, the red folder, the side-by-side comparison. I took a slow breath. My voice was steady. I didn't come here for revenge. I came to restore the truth. The next slide held my proposal. If I stayed, I said, I'd continue to enforce standards, but not as a guard dog for anyone's last name. Then I looked up and added, today, I'm declining the position of Director of Risk and Compliance. Silence rippled through the room. I'm accepting the offer from Seattle, I continued. A place where value is measured by what you build, not by who your father is. I stepped back, my gaze holding stronger than my tone. Graham stood still. Janine pressed her lips together. A few quiet breaths broke the silence. No one objected. No one tried to stop me. Around the table, I saw the faces of colleagues who had once barely noticed me. Now I was the one rewriting the light in my own story. I left the meeting with a small employee file box in hand. Walking past the compliance floor for the last time, I felt eyes follow, not out of shock, nor admiration, but with a kind of quiet respect. I pushed open the glass doors. The sunlight poured across Austin's long streets. I didn't look back. Driving up I-35, the car gliding smoothly along the highway, the morning radio, buzzed with headlines. Ever-bright scandal continues. CEO's daughter. Charged with fraud. Compliance officer walks away with integrity. I turned down the volume, let a soft song fill the space instead. Pip's photo flashed on my phone screen, his tiny grin, the one that always said, "You did it." Days later, when I arrived in Seattle, the welcome was simple. No spotlight, no ceremony, just a warm cup of coffee and a greeting. "We're glad you're here." The office was small, bright, real. No family politics, no empty prestige, just people who worked hard and meant it. That night, I stood by the window of my new apartment, watching the city lights shimmer below. Cars whispered through the streets, and I heard myself say quietly, I didn't destroy her, I just let her burn herself with the fire she lit. I came here to start again, to live by my own design. That was the end of the reckoning, but for me, it was only the beginning. Because in the quiet, one truth remained. No one gives you power, you carry it with you.